Hi guys, it's Dawn with MakeupClasses.com. Welcome everybody. Today on Finding Beauty, I have a very, very special guest. My friend Lisa Amato is here. Very exciting. I'm so happy. Lisa, thank you so much for agreeing to come on my show.
You're welcome. It's my
Today
pleasure.
we're going to be talking about the 1960s beauty, everything beauty, makeup, hair, and fashion. And if you've been following along, I've been doing a series on beauty of the decades. And yesterday we talked about the 1950s, where we start to really experience a lot of commercialism. Big, big boom in the economy, big commercialism, which swings us into the 1960s. We have more civil rights movement. The early 1960s, we have sorry, I'm getting feedback, Lisa. I'm sorry.
It's not on my end.
No? Oh, okay. I'm just going to lower it then. Sorry. It's like I hear myself echoing. I get very easily distracted. Sorry, guys. So early 1960s, we have John F. Kennedy comes into the picture. Jackie O, all of her style. We have those beautiful fashion is flowing from the 1950s. So we see very boxy dresses and skirts. And then, we have three major fashion, what's the word? Oh, goodness. Three major fashion I don't know. I'm lost for words. They just really stand out in American history. So we've got the early 1960s with the very sharp, fitted, tailored outfits, very formal, right? And then the mid 60s, we get into mod, which is a lot of London influence, London fashion, bring in the music, bring in the teenagers. Teenagers are really, really powerful people in their families, right? And then later on in the 1960s, we see more people rebelling or not for the Vietnam War. They're very confused, and fashion is influenced by that too. So like free love, very flowing clothes, denim, jeans, that sort of thing. So Lisa, let's start at the beginning. What would you like to share about the whole Jackie O era? And you take it away. You do all the talking. I'm going to start.
Okay, if you could tolerate my voice, we'll go.
I love your voice.
I've been told I have a very deep, froggy throat. But anyway, hi, I'm Lisa, and it's a pleasure to be on Finding Beauty with Dawn, and I'm grateful that she had invited me on. I would have loved to have done another era, something that I lived as an adult in, so that I can give you my direct experience. However, I did grow up with a mom who was very, very fashion conscious, along with her sister. I was born in 1961, so I did experience 8 and 9 years old at the end of the 60s were my bigger memories, but I do have a collection of photographs as well. When I was born, Dwight D. Eisenhower was president, and he had lost to JFK, and JFK served such a short sentence from 61 to 63 before he was assassinated. And the wives of the presidents were so influential, as they are today.
Yes.
First ladies, a huge influence. I mean, if some of you remember, like Michelle Obama talking about half your vegetables on your plate at dinner time, like that stuck with a lot of Americans, became more health conscious. So when a first lady says something powerful, it sticks. It's like the word of America. And
yes.
Jacqueline Kennedy was a younger first lady, as was the president. He may have been our youngest president to date. So being in her mid 30s, we watched her grow with him as a presidential hopeful, and then watched her grieve his loss. So the fashion was always on point. It had to be. She comes in with the pearl chain around her neck, the double strands of pearls, and the fitted, fine tailored suits, and the perfectly coiffed hairdo, and the hat to top off the look, the matching hat. Hats were very, very, very important back then, and there were statement pieces with just
and a lot of that formal wear, and also that persona that she had really flowed from the 1950s, right? Because yesterday I was talking about this ideal of this philosophy, really, that women were to stay at home, raise their children, and if you did work, you worked at home too. There was this double duty. So this idea of perfection was really embedded in American culture when it came to a female. And she definitely emulated that. She brought that into the 1960s. There really is no stop and start to fashion when it comes to the decades. Things flow into the new era and evolve, change, and then they flow out into the next era.
Absolutely. And being so closely monitored on television during the assassination and the grieving process of the burial and all that, everything she wore was scrutinized by women. It was either criticized or appreciated. She was the one setting the trend in the country of how women dressed, and that coming from the 50s, yes, that tight military look from the 40s traveled into the 50s, got a little more flowy, a lot more feminine, as you expressed, and in the 60s there were definitely 3 different eras within.
Yes.
And, she exemplified coming out of the 50s without a doubt.
Absolutely.
Lady Bird Johnson, I believe Lyndon B. Johnson became president for the rest of the 60s. Yeah. And his wife, basically, she was a plain Jane. She very seldom was seen wearing any cosmetics at all. But she did dress prominently for a first lady, and yet people weren't technically glued to watching her trends because she was so plain Jane, and they looked for other things to grasp onto. And then you talked about the music industry coming invasion, as we like to call it, the Beatles, and how everybody all of a sudden changed their whole look. And then at the end of the 60s, going into that beatnik look, which is what I'm trying to emulate a little bit today, the beatnik look.
You look amazing.
I'm a little more familiar with it, peace.
Right, because that's when you were a little older and you were able to, I guess, maybe pick out your clothes, have a little more of an opinion in what you were going to wear that day. Absolutely. So with Jackie O, all eyes were on her. People had TVs, color television enters, and I'm really interested in your take on that whole scrutinizing, like you said. That really started in the 1950s, because if you think about it, the 20s were, girls were breaking away from their Victorian mothers, right? They were experimenting with a lot of makeup, a new masculine style. Then we get into the 30s with the Depression, and women really came together and helped each other. They helped care for each other's family. The 40s came along, women still stuck together, because this is really when women realize, hey, girls, you know what? We have to start fighting for our rights, because they were going to work and they weren't earning as much, right? They were being discriminated against, which, by the way, in the 60s, now we have the Fair Wage Act. I think it was 1963. And then the 50s is really, I believe, is where all the chaos starts in women's psyche and culture. And their feminism in the 1960s really examines that. You have Betty Friedan, who is a feminist, who wrote this small book or pamphlet, you could say, on what was called the feminine mystique. And she really dove deeply into the ideology of women truly weren't happy at home. Of course, it was a very small case study. It was like 80 women that she knew that worked, were moms and were at home, and they claimed that they were really unhappy with what they were doing. And what her biggest claim to fame is that she was telling women, go get an education, study what you want to study, do what you love, and don't fall into this box of being a housewife. What is your take on that? What did you see in your family growing up in the 1960s when it came to feminism?
Well, my mother and her sister, they were 9.5 years apart in age. My mother being older, her sister being younger. They grew up sort of separately through the death of a grandparent. One in foster care, unfortunately, that was my mom, and the other was adopted. So they had different views on how fashion affected them. One was having their clothes picked out for them, and their rules were in the house, and the other was kind of basically free to make her own choices, my mother. So she was extremely influenced by women of power, particularly Hollywood. And growing up also not with much funds, she didn't have the luxury of having a television, let alone a color television, in the house growing up. So come the 60s, I lived in a household where we didn't have color television. We had black and white, and color television were for wealthier people. But we saw a lot of newsreel of Jackie Kennedy at that time. And when she came out in her outfits, women were just glued to the television or glued to the movie theater if they were going to the theater and getting news, because they still did that back in the 60s, believe it or not. They had like a little newsreel. And, it was more powerful than what the starlets were wearing. She was just your American citizen, and she exemplified what it was like to be an American. And she didn't work. Her job was just being a wife. So there was some scrutiny there, because here it is, we're fighting for our rights. We want to work in the workforce. We want to wear pants. We want to do things that men do. We want to get paid like men do. And just, that whole movement. So that's what I meant by scrutiny. Like,
yeah,
here she is, the epitome of America's sweetheart, beautifully coiffed and dressed. And at the same time, she's just a glorified housewife. And so therein lied the scrutiny. My mother went with the fashion trends, though.
that's awesome. And that's what a lot of women did. If they were home, they were going to make the best of it. If they were unhappy, supposedly, they were going to make the best of it and look their best and have a lot of fun. So I'm going to start doing my makeup. I want you to start diving into the British invasion. When it comes to makeup, we have foundation, we have more colors, we have powder. I am so relieved, Lisa. In the 1960s, we have different eye pencil colors, finally, because I had been using black and dark brown all week. And I know it looks so crazy on me, but that's what they had available, and that's what they did. So I'm going to start filling in my eyebrows. Eyebrows were really flowy, thicker. Women were growing out their brow hair. Talk about the makeup of the 1960s as I start my coiffing.
Okay, well, I do know that blue eyeshadow became popular in the 60s, particularly the end of when the British invasion came. And I put on blue eyeshadow today. And because it's blue, I had to actually go in my Halloween makeup in order to find it, because we don't wear blue eyeshadow too often today. It's just not a color that's, popular. And people will say, oh, that's so 1960s. And yes, it was blue eyeshadow. The lips were always frosted. That was a new trend, to have frosty pink lips. And I I did the best I can to emulate it because, again, this is not 1960s makeup, and I'm not a makeup artist. So
You look great.
I found a pink to go over a purple to make it frosty. And frosty was very popular because during the British invasion, they started introducing a lot of psychedelic colors.
Yes.
And the go-go boots came about. There you go. There's blue.
That's yes, this is like a blue green, a lot of your like bright colors. This was the most 60s shirt I had in my closet. A lot of big prints coming over.
I kind of wore this. This is as 60s as I had on this.
Yes.
It's a little difficult to find.
Well, that was more of like the early 60s, and this was more of like the middle 60s.
But I thought I'd show you these. These were my mom's. This was a short, a short waistcoat, and it has no label in there. And the inside is completely, I'm trying to go backward. The inside is completely lined in like a satiny material. They lined everything back then. They completed everything. And she would wear this, and the pattern on it is literally made out of tapestry, the same kind of material you would use to do your couches, upholster your furniture with. That's how heavy this thing was. And this was another little jacket that she wore, and it's lightweight suede, which was very popular by a company called Norton C. Norton. And it had a detachable collar and made out of fur, and it has little buttons and stuff. This was very popular for her back in the day. And I actually held on to them for all these years because she held on to me, and I still wear them today. So I do have some stuff from the 60s, I could say that.
Do you notice when you said how heavy it is, the difference in the quality? I'm assuming that was American made.
It was, and it was sewn in most parts by hand. You could actually see little stitching. It was not mass produced. And maybe there was 100 of them in the whole world, you know.
Wow.
So yeah, they really put a lot of care into these garments, how they were created and you know, sustained. In fact, I thought it would be pretty cool to show you some fancy outfits that my mom had back in the 60s and her sister. My mom went on a cruise to Nassau in 1968, the latter part of the second era with the British invasion. And I'll get it right.
Wow.
No glare. That is a shirt and skirt. The skirt is so heavy, it's literally made out of blanket quilting. But you could see the colors and the design. Sorry, I'm really bad at this.
No, I know everything's the opposite.
I stink at this. You go left, I go right.
You're great.
But you could see the colors and the detail in the design is just, it's just amazing.
Wow.
This is another item also, very British invasion, to wear paisley with the colors. This was also a two-piece outfit with a shawl and a long skirt. And she had little Mary Jane shoes on. That carried over. Even though this was 1968, they wore the Mary Jane shoes pretty much throughout the 60s. And then finally, her sister, this was at the end of the 60s as well. Also, my aunt, who's 9.5 years younger than my mother.
I love it.
She was totally into the British invasion. That was my brother and my aunt. He graduated junior high school, so that's ninth grade graduation. He looked like he was graduating college back then. We looked so much older. And my aunt looked amazing. I loved that dress she had on.
I do too.
Exactly, you know, and the reason why I wore this is because of this photograph, which is one of my favorites. They wore thicker, wide bands back in the 60s. They wore that half and half look, was very popular. All British.
Asymmetrical. Yeah. Let me ask you two things. First, the outfits on your aunt and your mom. What do you think something like that, because it's so detailed, what do you think something like that cost back then? Was that very expensive?
I would say the quilted skirt and top that my mother bought, if she probably paid like $40 for it, that would be really expensive for that thing. If she had to buy it today, I would say it probably run about 200 easily, just for the, maybe the skirt alone.
Right.
And I'm going by maybe like a department store pricing.
Right. And my second question with the photos, your aunt, with the mini skirt, was that your aunt you said?
Yeah, the dress.
Yes, I want you to talk about the mini skirt. That was that came over from England, that came from London. Mary Quant, I hope I'm saying that correct.
Yes, Mary Quant.
Big fashion designer. She also really rocked that short Vidal Sassoon haircut. He was really influential in women's hair with the asymmetrical bob. Or wait, was it asymmetrical? No, it was pretty symmetrical. The symmetrical bob, really, really short hair, the pixie haircut. Twiggy, the famous English model that really rocked that short hair. What would you like to say about that?
My mom, because she's my mom, dressed me for the sign of the times. And this is a picture of me back in 1967 with the short skirt, the bangs, the bobbed hair. That was the look that adults wore. I actually had probably boots on too, because go-go boots were the rave, especially if they were white. My mom liked her hair short. To this day, she wears it short. This is the mid-60s of Mom. She wore an outfit to exemplify power. She went into the workforce back in the 60s.
And she's wearing a tie.
And she's wearing a tie around her neck. Women wore embellishments around their neck during the 60s a lot. Like my aunt's dress had a big flower piece over there, believe it or not. Here's another photo where Mom wears, like, they called it an ascot. And they would, I don't know if you've ever seen Austin Powers, but he wore that flouncy front. That was kind of a look in the 60s to wear a very flouncy, pronounced type of chest buffed up neck.
Yes. Yeah. I remember my grandparents, my grandmother and my Nana, they both would wear scarves and, it would be puffed up or, some type of embellishment around the neck. It was like really, it just sharpened the whole look. I'm going to start my eyeshadow. I'm going to use that famous, frosty seafoam green. Like Lisa said, the blues were popular. We see a lot of frost and shimmer in the eyeshadow, pink, purple, a lot of drawing on the face as well, where lines were drawn into the eyeshadow. Just a lot of fun. I'm just going to work with one color today as Lisa talks, just to keep it simple.
Well, I was going to add on about something that's taboo. Underpants and underwear in the 60s were very different than any other time. They were starting to advertise in drawings and photographs. In fact, little boys in school would look at underwear models as if it were like looking at pornography today, and they would hide it and it would be fun for them. But the women back then, the only colors that were really available in women's undergarments would be like the pastels, the light blue, light yellow, light pink, and of course white. White was stationary. And they wore something called, I'm trying to think what it was called. I think lace was just introduced. My mother wore what was called taxi pants.
Okay.
Pants, they were like boy shorts that came down a little longer and up much higher.
Lace was around, but it disappeared because the cost involved. But I'm pretty sure it comes back.
So Lycra was introduced into the industry at that time too. So it would keep a woman's shape, and it was very shapely to wear the taxi underwear underneath a pair of tight-fitting pants and shoes. We don't talk about the shoes too often, but my mother loved wearing her Mary Janes throughout. And Mary Jane's stuck and stayed. Go-go boots, like I said, white was go-go boots.
I love those.
And go-go boots, if you don't know what they look like, they come below the knee. They're not above the knee. Today we wear boots that go above the knee into the thigh. They wore go-go boots just below the knee, and usually they were made out of white patent leather type of material. Patent leather was very popular, just started coming out in the mid-60s. It was all the rave if you owned a pair of patent leather shoes. And
Yes.
pumps weren't very big in the 60s. Women were a little more practical on the heel. They were a little less.
I'm going to start the eyeliner, and the eyeliner on top is still pretty thick. And that cat eye from the 50s also carries over into the 60s as well, which is a lot of fun. I love this green. How fun is that?
It's nice on you.
Yes, it's
You have
fun.
eyelids. I don't.
So groovy.
That was the word I was thinking of, groovy.
There we go. There we
That's
go.
a great word.
A lot of your like plasticky feels, the vinyl, the patent leather. We see a lot of plastic and jewelry. That was big at the time because of now the space age influence in American culture. So we see a lot of metals, right? Like the silver, that industrial look to clothes as well, because of our interest in astronomy. And I think it was 61 or 63? I forget. John Glenn goes up in space and revolves around Earth. So that was like a really big influence with that plasticky and metal feel to clothing, I guess.
I'm not really certain about the plasticky part.
Okay.
Other than shoes and earrings. Earrings were definitely long, big, dangly, all kinds of products used to make earrings back then. I have a couple of fun ones that, that might pass for a 1960s look. But I remember that peace and unselling the war in Vietnam were all important to the younger culture. And I have a brother who's 6.5 years older than me. So he brought around girlfriends, and I kind of like wanted to be that kid who emulated all the teenagers. And so his girlfriends would come over with their records and their record players and their, and they'd wear their jewelry, and I'd ask them questions, or can I try that on? And, so I got some of that as well, which was pretty cool.
That is so fun. How cool is that?
Yeah.
That
if
is
I were
so
a little
fun.
older in the 60s and a little younger now, I'd be a happy person.
Right? Yeah. So the Vietnam War lasted in total 19 years. It started officially, I think it was 1947. The US doesn't get really involved until the 60s. And there was a lot of misinformation. A lot of people didn't understand why we were there, what the exact cause was. There was a lot of casualty, along with the civil rights movement, women's rights. We now have this like mix of all of these political views, I guess kind of, just stirring up thought and different philosophies, questioning our moral compass. And that starts to affect hair and makeup and fashion as well. So let's move out of the mod London feel of hair. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you guys noticed, but my hair, I did the little flip on the end. That was more of the beginning of the 1960s, right? It would have been very smooth and a lot of bang going on. And then we get into like that Bridget Bardot, the tease, a lot of teasing in the hair, that bump. Yes, the bump in the back was really big, like what Lisa's wearing. And then we move into the 1960s, where the hair is kind of let go. We see Black women just not into like styling hair. We see the afro hair just grows out. Same with white women. We just grow our hair out. We just leave it as is. Talk about hair, makeup, and fashion of the late 60s now, as we are influenced by the Vietnam War.
Well, in all honesty, when I was in the late 60s, if you went to a prominent affair, women still coiffed their hair and got their hair done piled up really high. I have another photo to exemplify that with my family. You could see my mom here. She has her hair with a hairpiece on.
Yeah,
they piled it up, and she wore embellishments of feathers. And myself, I had the little girls do with the banana curls, were very popular on a little girl. But my mom, I don't know if it was so terrible to wear your hair short, as long as it was natural, like you said. And my mom always kept her hair really short, so she always felt her best with it short. I myself always had my hair long. And yes, by the time I was older in the 60s, those banana curls, when you let them down, my hair was probably just stringy and mid-waist, and nothing done with it. So the hippie era is what started in the late 60s into the early 70s, when they were trying to unsell the war and protest. And the Nixon era came into the 70s. Prior to that, the women were just letting their hair down. They called it a fall. And women who had short hair, they would buy wigs that looked like it. So long, straight hair was the trend at the time. And when I showed you that picture of my aunt, she's actually wearing a fall.
Yes,
because her hair was also short. And,
hair pieces, like you said, adding hair to the updo, the bun, that was really popular for women to purchase things like that to add to the style.
Absolutely. As far as like the makeup is concerned, I'm not an expert with the makeup. I can only tell you that my mother, as far as the color was concerned, the biggest color out there for eyeshadow at the end of the 60s it wasn't quite white and it wasn't quite gold. It was somewhere caught in between, and Revlon came out with it, I believe, just about that time. And it was shimmery, and women loved it. And then that was the start of kind of wearing white makeup, white go-go boots, white accessories to kind of blend in with you see how there's a white line along this colorful scarf for a reason, because the white stands out so much in it. And so, it would make the eyes pop if you wore like a white shadow and then a thin black line, or whatever you said color line that came out at the time.
Yes.
I'm not familiar with that myself. That's really more your department. But I do remember all those frosty lipsticks.
Yes, frost was so in. I'm wearing also nude colors. I put on some nude lipstick. Pink blush was definitely all the rage. A lot of detail to the eye, a lot of drawing. I'm going to finish up my look with some really thick, heavy lashes. Lashes were all the rage in the 60s.
My mother was considered the natural sister. Her sister was considered the, I guess, the fashionista who went the extra yard. Her sister wore lashes.
Okay.
Before they were even popular. And she would always never leave the house, not even to go down the block for a pack of smokes back then, without lashes on.
Wow.
Yeah. It was like, leaving your home without lipstick on for some people. As long as they had their lipstick on, they felt comfortable. But
well, that sounds familiar, because wearing lashes is all the rage right now, especially with the lash extension. So yeah, you have a lot of people right now that are not leaving the house. Sorry, it's hard for me to talk and do this.
I'll talk for you.
Yes.
I I tried putting lashes on, and yesterday you talked about when you put the lashes on, to put them on the lash line, not on the
Yes.
lid. And I never knew that. So
Aw.
now I know why it was an epic fail for me all these years. And I guess I have very long lashes to begin with. So
Mhm.
I don't know when the eyelash curler thing started happening, but I remember being young and women would curl their eyelashes. I don't recall if it was in the 60s or the 70s. It may have been a little later
I
on.
think the lash curler was invented earlier. There were I really couldn't find a concrete answer because there were so many variations, but I will research that today. But yes, I do remember my aunts also having a lash curler. I had an aunt that was very much the fashionista, and she had the go-go boots. And I mean, this was in the 70s. I wasn't born until 1974, but she still like carried over a lot of the looks from the 60s, even into the late 70s, from when I remember, because I was a baby, obviously.
Well, growing up with my mother being a little more on the natural side, that white gold shadow kind of appealed to her because it was
Yes.
focusing to a more natural tone. Uh, they started changing the pink blushes toward the end too. I had no pink blush now. So I actually used my daughter's pink eyeshadow as blush. I'm cheating, but
That's awesome.
I don't usually use blushes today. People use bronzes. They do the whole face to look like they have a tan. They didn't do that then. They still wanted that nice, bright, sunny kind of look and the rosy cheeks.
Yes. And mascara and an exaggerated bottom lash was all the rage too, thanks to Twiggy. And I don't know who did her makeup for those photo shoots. I have to look that up, who our makeup artist was. But they would draw the long eyelashes on the bottom,
Oh, okay.
which was
I
really
used to love
cool
her.
and fun. Yeah, that was that London, again, that London British influence. All the music, the celebrities that all came over into America. So, what do you think of this 1960s look, Lisa? That
You know what, Dawn?
up quick.
You are a fashionista of the ages. You could look good in any decade, whether they're wearing white or olive. It doesn't make
Oh,
a
you're so
difference. It all looks
sweet.
well and works well with you. And yes, I totally dig it, man. It's groovy.
Prove it. I just want to show everybody the lashes that I'm using. 8D. They are crazy, Lisa, in person, crazy, but I could see through the screen. They don't look too bad. Don't look too bad. But they are
Amazing.
heavy duty lashes. Yeah, 8D, maximum dimension and volume by Ardell. Yeah, crazy.
I'm not familiar with the D lines, 8D, 7D, I guess.
Well, like 3D, 4D, so it's like eight dimensions of lash going on here. So yeah,
otherworldly.
this was so much fun, Lisa. I just love you so much. Thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge and experience. And I know you love makeup, hair, and fashion, on an everyday level as well. And thank you so much for sharing your family history as well and showing the world all those pictures and the clothes too. It was really, really cool. What a great lesson for everybody today.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate all the lessons you've given. Even if I don't watch them live, I definitely cheat and watch them in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning. And I go back in time because I don't want to miss it. I learned so much from you over the past year, especially, by the tips that you supply are invaluable. And I learned something new every single lesson. So,
Oh, thank you. Wow. Thank you. Thanks so much. Well, guys, we'll see you tomorrow. No, we won't see you tomorrow because it's Sunday. I will be back on Monday because I have another show with my friend Liz where we do the beauty broadcast. Monday starts the 1970s. So we're going to learn all about that, how the late 1960s, all that we have in the 60s, how it is brought over into the 1970s. And I'll share a lot of American history with you guys also. Thanks again, Lee. And I'll see you real soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.